Do you ever feel like you're disappearing a little more each day? Not for the world, but of herself. Disappear. Does this word scare you or relieve you? We live in a world that teaches us to always be present, always available, always accessible, but nobody taught you that some can be the most sacred way to find yourself again. You give yourself, you explain yourself, you adapt, you accept, even when what you're accepting is killing you inside. And what is left of you after so much forced presence? Silence, tiredness, empty. Rumi wrote, "Don't get lost among those who don't see your light, but you have lost your way, trying to fit where it no longer fits, trying to be seen by those who choose to ignore you, trying to justify your existence to people who can't even see your own soul." Disappearing is also self-love. It's an act of courage that no one applauds, but that your soul recognizes as freedom. You don't have to be everywhere. You don't have to reply to every message. You don't need to smile to continue pleasing those who don't listen to you when you cry inside. Maybe what they call escape is just your heart saying, "He arrives." Have you ever wondered how many times you have abandoned yourself trying to save someone? How many times have you ignored your own limits to avoid appearing selfish? How many times have you put yourself second to be accepted, loved, chosen? Rumi also said, "Sometimes disappearing is the only way to find yourself again." This is not just a pretty metaphor. It's a silent cry for self-love. It's the soul asking for a break. It's the body begging for rest. It is the spirit wanting silence. Because there is a type of exhaustion that cannot be cured with sleep. It heals with distance, with inner presence, with that subtle disappearance that the world doesn't understand, but that you feel like a return home. Disappearing is not about others. It's about you. It's about looking in the mirror and finally recognizing who you are, out of obligation, beyond expectations, out of the constant pressure of having to be well all the time. The pain of disappearing can be great, but the pain of continuing to ignore yourself is even greater. You have been slowly fading away, and nobody notices, because you learn to smile with your eyes full of tears, saying, "It's okay," with a broken chest, to be present, even when your soul has already left. But today, perhaps for the first time, you are beginning to understand that the silence that scares others may be exactly what saves you. Disappearing is not disappearing from the world. It is to appear to yourself. It's about stopping trying to be what they expect and start really listening to yourself. It is difficult? Yes, because no one taught you that disappearing is also a cure. They taught you to run after it, proving your worth, never give up. But nobody taught you that some battles are won by letting go, walking away, disappearing. Do you feel it? This desire to hide from the noise, the demands, the invasion, the obligation to always be strong? Maybe what you are calling weakness. Just let your spirit say, "Listen to me, find me, choose me." And that's why we need to talk about this now, because there is a truth that no one had the courage to tell you. Disappearing is also presence. Presence of soul, presence with yourself, presence with what you've always pushed to the back burner, afraid of appearing weak, ungrateful, or insensitive. But ignoring one's own pain is not nobility, it is self-abandonment, and you've already abandoned yourself too much. So now, pause, breathe, feel it. This silence that is forming inside you, it is not empty. He is the beginning of a healing. He is the cradle of a new identity. It is there, in the absence of the noise of others, that your truth begins to whisper. If this video spoke to your soul, I want to ask you one thing. Right here in the comments, I choose to disappear to find myself again. Yes, he does right. It's not just a comment. It's a commitment, an act of quiet courage, a sacred vow with your own soul. And if you felt that this content brought clarity, acceptance, or even some relief, leave your like now, because it helps this message reach other souls lost in the noise. And maybe, just like you, they too need permission to disappear and finally see themselves. Subscribe to the channel. This is just the beginning. Here, each video is a mirror, a sanctuary, a reminder. You don't have to lose yourself to be loved. But sometimes, disappearing is the deepest way to love yourself. Now take a deep breath, because in the next step of this journey, we'll talk about the invisible pain that made you believe that disappearing was weakness, when in fact, it was always wisdom. Have you ever felt like you need to disappear, but feel guilty about it? As if taking care of yourself were some kind of betrayal. As if the simple act of stepping away, of being silent, of disappearing for a while, meant abandoning others. And so you remain there, physically present, but absent from yourself. Smiling on the outside while everything inside you screams for silence, for peace, for a break. But no one sees, because you learned to hide. You learned to give of yourself even with your heart in ruins. You learned to prioritize everyone but yourself. You might be wondering why this happens. Why is it so hard to just walk away? Why does the weight of guilt hit you so hard when you think about retreating? It's because you've been taught that your worth lies in your usefulness, that you're only lovable when you're serving, helping, solving problems, smiling, keeping things together. And when you think about stopping, about simply disappearing for a while, something inside you whispers, what if they stop loving you when you stop being useful? This is the invisible wound that almost no one has the courage to face. The wound of someone who was loved conditionally. The wound of someone who learned that they are only seen when they are sacrificing themselves. And so you keep going, even tired, even exhausted, even knowing that you are losing yourself a little more every day. The cruelest thing is that, often, not even others ask this of you, but you demand it of yourself. You pressure yourself, because your mind has been shaped to believe that disappearing is wrong, that saying "I can't" is selfish, that needing space is ungrateful, and without realizing it, you silence yourself, you nullify yourself, you distance yourself from yourself, until one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize who's there. And you know what's most painful about all this? It's that, even with all this effort, you still feel alone. You still feel like you're not enough. You still feel like no one really sees you. Because deep down, what you want isn't just to be useful. What you want is to be loved. Loved for who you are, not for what you offer. But this pain, this silent loneliness, no one sees it. Because you've learned to perform well. You've learned to show yourself strong. You've learned to say everything's okay when in reality your soul is crying out for help. Maybe that's why silence attracts you so much. Because in silence, you don't need to pretend. In silence, you don't need to smile to hide it. In silence, you can simply exist, without owing anyone anything. But still, when you think about disappearing, the guilt creeps in, as if disappearing would mean failure, as if withdrawing were a sign of weakness, as if the world wouldn't keep turning without you. And this belief keeps you trapped. It prevents you from healing. It forces you to continue where there's no longer room for you. The problem is that this prison is invisible, because it has no bars. It has obligations. It has unspoken promises. It has old fears. It has traumas you've never had time to address. And this prison makes you believe that disappearing is a loss, when, in fact, disappearing can be a gain. It can be a reunion. It can be a rebirth. Do you feel it? This fatigue that isn't physical, this weight that has no name, this desire to just stop, shut down, be silent, hide, not because you're weak, but because you're exhausted from being strong all the time, exhausted from having to explain, justify, support. And you know what makes it even more confusing? Even with all this pain, there's a small feeling of guilt just thinking about it, as if the mere desire to distance yourself were already wrong. As if self-care were a burden, as if taking care of yourself meant abandoning the one you love. But it's not. You need to understand. Disappearing for a while isn't rejecting anyone. It's rescuing yourself. It's listening to yourself. It's protecting yourself. It's allowing your soul to breathe free from pressure, free from noise, free from the obligation to always be okay. It's you saying, I matter too, because you matter, even when you're not producing. Even when you're not helping, even when you just exist. You're not selfish for needing time. You're not ungrateful for craving silence. You're not wrong for feeling like you need to disappear. What's wrong is the world convincing you that choosing yourself is wrong, that prioritizing yourself is ugly, that resting is a luxury, when in fact all of this is survival. It's emotional dignity, it's self-love. And maybe now, at this very moment, you're starting to remember this. Starting to feel that this desire to disappear isn't a sign of weakness, but a sign that your soul wants to come home, that it's tired of living in the background of your own life, that it needs space, acceptance, and you. So, if all this spoke to you in any way, write a single sentence here in the comments. My silence is sacred. This phrase isn't just any rant. It's a reminder to yourself, a symbol of the beginning of a new cycle, a step toward your own reunion. And maybe, just maybe, it's everything your soul has been waiting for to start breathing again. You were taught to give yourself away until you were completely drained. From a young age, you learned that love was synonymous with sacrifice, that being there for someone else before being there for yourself was proof of affection, character, and worth. And the more you gave of yourself, the more you hoped someone would notice, that someone would reciprocate, that someone would love you with the same intensity you loved, with the same dedication, with the same care. But that return never came. And over time, the giving became a wound, the surrender became emptiness, and the silence that once seemed like peace became loneliness. But no one told you that self-love also manifests in silence. No one taught you that sometimes the most profound act of self-care is to step away, to disappear for a while, not to punish anyone, but to listen to yourself. Rumi said, sometimes you have to step away to listen to yourself. And what does that really mean? It means you need space. Space between what's expected of you and what your soul truly wants. Space between the noise of the world and the whispers of your essence. Space between the need to be useful and the right to simply exist. But we haven't learned this. We've learned that stepping away is abandonment, that disappearing is weakness, that needing time is problematic, cold, or insensitive. So you try to resist. You pretend everything's okay. You put on another smile and go. You push yourself beyond your limit once again. You go against your will, once again. And it kills you, but slowly, silently, in a way that no one notices, sometimes, not even you. And this is the crux of your pain. You're trying to continue where your soul left off, trying to maintain relationships that have already broken down, trying to sustain roles that no longer fit who you're becoming, trying to feign normalcy when everything inside you screams for transformation. And you feel it. You feel something different about you now, as if what once nourished you now suffocates you, as if the same conversations, the same places, the same routines have lost their meaning. And that's precisely where the real conflict begins, because you feel the need for change, but fear what you might lose in the process. But there's something no one has explained to you. Pain doesn't come from change. Pain comes from resistance. Pain comes from trying to keep alive what has already died, from trying to hold on to what no longer wants to be held, from trying to remain where your soul has already asked to leave. You're suffering not because something went wrong, but because you haven't yet had the courage to say enough to what no longer serves you. You're in internal conflict because your soul wants silence, but your mind wants approval. Your soul wants peace, but your ego wants acceptance. Your soul wants to retreat, but you've learned that you need to be strong at all times. And you know what's even more profound? It's realizing that, deep down, you already know you need to disappear, but you're waiting for external permission, as if someone had to validate your exhaustion, as if someone had to authorize your pain, as if you needed approval to simply exist without having to constantly justify yourself. But that permission will never come, because only you can grant it. Only you know what hurts. Only you feel the weight you carry. Only you hear the silent scream that comes from within, the one no one hears but which you feel every day. The root of your suffering isn't in the other. It's in the disconnection from your own essence. It's in the way you were taught to silence your desires to maintain bonds, to silence your truth to avoid conflict, to deny your intuition to satisfy expectations. And now, all of this is taking a heavy toll on you. Your peace, your energy, your identity. Your soul is tired of living for a love that demands constant denial. Your soul craves presence. It craves truth. It craves silence. And it is in this silence that healing begins, because there is no true self-love without inner space. And there is no inner space when everything around you demands that you constantly fill the voids of others. You're trying to hold the world on your shoulders, while your own inner structure is crumbling. You're trying to maintain connections that drain you, roles that hurt you, words that swallow you. And all of this because somehow you believe that disappearing would mean being forgotten. But listen carefully. Disappearing for a while isn't disappearing. It's rediscovering yourself. It's hearing the sound of your own breathing again. It's remembering your existence beyond the role you play in the lives of others. You don't need to have all the answers right now, but you do need to accept that there are questions within you that won't be answered in the noise, that won't be resolved while you're distracted by what others expect. There's a part of you that only blossoms in absence, in seclusion, in solitude. There's a wisdom hidden in the pause you so fear. There's a truth waiting for you at the very point where you decide to stop running. And that truth will only reveal itself when you allow silence to speak louder than fear. So, if this passage touched something deep inside you, if this silent pain seems to describe exactly what you've been experiencing, write a single sentence here in the comments. My soul has gone before me. This sentence is more than words. It's a mirror, an acknowledgement, a step toward the reunion you've been putting off for too long. What no one told you, and perhaps you need to hear it now, both gently and firmly, is that disappearing isn't running away. You're not hiding. You're coming back to yourself, coming back to where you should have been all along. The problem is that the whole world teaches us to go out there. Go, show yourself, prove your worth, be present, be useful, be strong, be everything, except yourself. But there's a key, a spiritual, emotional, and silent key that only reveals itself when you stop trying to be what they expect. And that key has a name: inner presence. Yes, disappearing is an act of presence, but not for others, for you. It's a subtle and profound shift where, for the first time in a long time, you decide you'll no longer live according to other people's expectations. You decide to choose yourself. You decide to care for your soul as if caring for something sacred. And that's scary, because loving yourself radically, the way that requires silence, distance, and pause, is not a comfortable path. It's a path that confronts you with everything you've avoided feeling. Maybe that's why you've put off this move for so long. Because retreating is facing yourself. It's realizing how much you've hurt yourself trying to please. It's noticing how much you've lost yourself trying to belong. It's feeling how much you've stopped living your own truth for fear of disturbing. And all of this returns like silent waves when you finally allow yourself to no longer be available to the world. Because when you say no to the world, even if only for a moment, you're saying yes to something much more essential, reconnecting with your essence. Disappearing, then, is not vanishing. It's starting over. It's an invisible ritual, a sacred return to your own center. And the most beautiful thing, and also the most painful, is realizing that this return only happens when you stop justifying yourself. When you understand, deep down, that you don't need to explain your pain, your exhaustion, your absence. That you don't need to prove to anyone that you're exhausted. That you don't need to dramatize to be taken seriously. That you just need to feel. You just need to allow yourself. You just need to decide silently that you're going to walk away, because that's the only possible path now. And here's the truth no one tells you. Healing begins when you allow yourself to no longer be available to others, so that you can finally be whole for yourself. Because as long as you remain too accessible, too emotionally open, too available to all demands that aren't yours, your energy will continue to slip through your fingers, and you'll continue to feel that nameless fatigue, that exhaustion, that no night's sleep can cure. Because it's not physical rest you need, it's spiritual reconnection, realignment, true presence with what you feel but have been keeping silent about for so long. There's a profound wisdom in this kind of disappearance. It's the wisdom of someone who understands they can no longer continue to emotionally abuse themselves to maintain the appearance of stability. It's the wisdom of someone who realizes that being always available is a trap. That not setting boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment. That trying to save others while you're sinking is a disguised form of emotional suicide. And the soul, when it reaches this point, begins to beg, sometimes with sadness, sometimes with illness, sometimes with an emptiness you can no longer ignore. Do you feel that emptiness? That feeling that nothing fills you anymore? That everything has lost its color? That there's something inside you that's trying to emerge, but is constantly silenced? Then maybe it's time to listen. To silence the outside world and hear what your soul has to say. Because it speaks. It always has. But you were too busy trying not to disappoint anyone. And in this attempt to be everything to everyone, you forgot to be something inside. The key is there, in the silence, in the absence, in the chosen disappearance. Not as an escape, but as a return. Not as a surrender, but as a reconnection. You need this pause. You need this break. You need this time where no one calls you, no one demands you, no one demands you. And maybe you need to allow some connections to fall apart, because not everyone will understand this choice. Not everyone will know how to respect your process, and that's okay, because those who truly love you will understand. And those who don't understand, maybe they never truly loved you. They only loved what you offered, not who you were. So don't be afraid. Disappearing is a legitimate path. It's a gesture of love. It's you looking at yourself with affection and saying, I deserve to come back to myself. And coming back to yourself at this deep level isn't something you do between appointments. It's not something that happens in the breaks of your routine. It requires total presence. It requires emptying yourself of the world in order to truly fulfill yourself. If you feel you need this, if there is something inside you that screams for this reunion, write the phrase here in the comments. I came back to myself. He writes with intention, with truth, like someone planting a seed of return, like someone finally accepting that disappearing isn't the end. It's the beginning of healing. Maybe you really are tired, but it's not the usual tiredness that a hot bath or a night's sleep can fix. It's an existential tiredness, a tiredness that begins in the soul and spreads through the body, the mind, and relationships. A tiredness of constantly having to explain yourself, of justifying every silence, every absence, every limit you try to impose. Tired of maintaining relationships that don't nourish you, that only drain you, that only demand you. Relationships that have become silent contracts of imbalance, where you always give more than you receive, where you give yourself completely and, in the end, feel it's still not enough. Maybe you tried to be understood. Maybe you said, I'm not okay, with words or gestures. Maybe you sent subtle signals that something inside you was breaking, but no one noticed. Or worse, they noticed, but pretended not to see. Because if you broke the strong role, they would have to face their own fragility too. So it was easier to demand that you remain available, present, smiling, strong, even though everything inside was crumbling. And so it was, between one tearful and the next, between a forced conversation and an emptiness that accompanied you even when surrounded by people, that you began to understand that disappearing wasn't cowardice. It was self-preservation. It was what was left. It was the only way to protect what little remained of you, that silent core of your essence that insisted on surviving despite being ignored every day. You disappeared, and perhaps to this day, you carry guilt for that. Guilt for having stopped responding. Guilt for not having said goodbye. Guilt for having left certain people without explanation. But the truth that few have the courage to admit is that sometimes the only possible explanation is exhaustion. And no one has the right to demand more than you had to give. No one can demand words from someone who no longer has a voice. Because the soul, when it screams too much without being heard, learns to silence itself definitively. Before, you were self-effacing. You constantly molded your words, your energy, your presence to fit others' expectations. You accepted emotional scraps for fear of being alone. You tolerated disrespect disguised as good manners for fear of appearing weak. You diminished yourself for fear of upsetting others. You made concessions that tore at your core just to maintain bonds that weakened you. And all of this with the hope that, one day, someone would notice. Someone would realize how hard you fought to be enough. But that day never came, and you had to learn the hard way, that no one would come to save you, that no one would come with the care you so generously offered others, that no one would bring you back to yourself, except yourself. That's when you stopped, not out of anger, not revenge, but exhaustion, for sanity, for a modicum of self-respect that, even stifled, still pulsed deep within. Then, everything changed, not magically, but silently. Solitude, once feared, became an altar, a sacred space where you began to listen to your own pain without rushing, where your wounds stopped being shameful and became portals, where you understood that presence isn't about being surrounded by people, it's about being whole with yourself. And it was in this emptiness, which many would call disappearance, that you began to recognize yourself, to see yourself without masks, to remember who you were before all the pressures, before the traumas, before needing to be strong all the time. This solitude became home, a place where you began to clean up the mess left by years of emotional neglect. A place where you stopped screaming to be heard and started whispering within. A place where, little by little, answers began to come, not from the world, but from your own soul, because it always knew, always guided you, always tried to show you that disappearing isn't the end. It's the beginning. It's a return. It's a new beginning. Do you realize this? That the loneliest phases of your life were also the most sincere? That when all seemed lost, what was actually lost was only what no longer belonged to you? And that by disappearing, you didn't hide. You rebuilt yourself? Maybe right now as you listen to me, you're in that place, between the end and the beginning, between exhaustion and decision. And that's okay. No one needs to understand you now. No one needs to validate this movement, because it's yours. It's intimate. It's silent and at the same time revolutionary. You're not running away, you're saving yourself. And anyone who has lost their way knows the strength it takes to choose again. So if this part of the video hugged you inside, if you felt that this story could be yours, write a single sentence here in the comments. My solitude became an altar. Leave this phrase as a mark, as a memory, as a reminder that you too can transform absence into presence, pain into wisdom, and silence into home. You didn't disappear, and perhaps no one has told you this clearly, honestly, with the power that this truth carries. You didn't disappear. You chose yourself. There's a profound, silent difference between hiding out of fear and walking away out of wisdom. You didn't run away. You didn't abandon anyone. You simply realized somewhere along the way that staying where your soul no longer belonged was a form of internal betrayal. And by walking away, by disappearing from the noise, by silencing what sickened you, you didn't lose yourself. You recovered. What happened was a turning point, an awakening that didn't come with fireworks or grand revelations, but with an exhaustion that could no longer be ignored, with a limit that had been crossed too many times, with a pain that, from being silenced so much, eventually exploded in the form of indifference, apathy, or simply exhaustion. Tired of holding on to what doesn't flow, tired of giving without reciprocity, tired of pretending everything is fine when your inner world begs for renewal. And then, finally, you said no. No to those who don't listen to you. No to the repetitive cycle of abandoning yourself. No to the need to always be the understanding one, the patient one, the strong one. And in that no, you chose yourself. And choosing yourself sometimes means not responding. It means not justifying. It means not going back. It means allowing yourself to close cycles even if no one understands, even if they talk, even if loneliness comes, because there is a loneliness that doesn't hurt. It liberates. It brings you back to yourself. It reconnects you with what is essential. And this solitude, when embraced consciously, transforms into a sanctuary. Rumi said, "Don't settle for crumbs of attention. The soul craves true feasts." And your soul knows this. It's always known. It's always screamed when you accepted too little. It's always cried when you kept quiet for fear of losing someone who was never there. It's always tried to wake you up, even when you'd rather continue dreaming of illusory versions of love. But now you're awake. And waking up, even if late, is always an act of courage. You realize that love that requires your absence to exist isn't love. It's control. That affection that conditions you to live tired, available, exhausted, and drained isn't affection. It's dependence. That relationships that survive on your constant denial aren't bonds. They're emotional shackles. And you chose to cut those ties. Not with hate, not with resentment, but with a silence that heals more than 1,000 screams. A silence that says, enough. A silence that, though it may seem like distance to those watching from the outside, is absolute presence with your truth. This is true spiritual empowerment. The moment you stop seeking approval and start seeking peace. The moment you stop chasing and start walking inward. The moment you realize that nothing, absolutely nothing, is worth the price of your emotional health. No bond, no promise, no "I love you" spoken between mistreated wounds is worth more than the serenity of being at peace with your own conscience. And perhaps now, as you hear these words, you feel something shifting inside. Something subtle, yet profound. A kind of return. As if a part of you that had been distant began to return. As if that inner child that had been silent for so many years began to whisper again. As if that piece of your soul you thought lost began to reorganize itself in the silence you chose to inhabit. And this is rebirth. Disappearing, when done with love, is being reborn in peace. It's not erasing your history. It's not rejecting everything you've experienced. It's actually accepting. Accepting that it was what needed to be, that you did the best with what you knew, that you persisted out of love, that you stayed out of fear, that you tried so hard. But now is a different time, a time where persistence is no longer a virtue, it's a prison, where excessive effort is no longer proof of strength, it's a sign of exhaustion, where disappearing isn't vanishing from the world, but finally appearing to yourself. And when you show up for yourself, the outside world loses its urgency. The phone might ring and you don't have to answer. Someone might ask where you are, and you can smile silently, knowing you're exactly where you need to be, inside. Inside your process, inside your healing, inside your truth. And that's enough. That sustains, that heals. This is the turning point, the moment when guilt begins to give way to understanding, the moment when the need to please begins to die, and the desire to live authentically is born, the moment when you understand that life isn't about being present all the time, but about being whole, wherever you are. Because presence without truth is noise, and you've lived through too much noise. Now it's time to live in silence. Silence full of meaning. Silence charged with decision. Silence that says, I haven't lost myself. I've found myself. If this part touched you deeply, if you felt like you've reached this turning point, right here in the comments. My silence is my strength. Write for yourself. To anchor this moment. To transform this listening into a choice. To remember tomorrow that disappearing consciously isn't absence, it's courage. And that your soul now craves true feasts. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized every word, every silence, every truth whispered in this video. You felt it. You walked through it. And now, perhaps for the first time in a long time, you're beginning to truly hear yourself. This isn't a coincidence, it's awakening. If this video spoke to your essence, if it embraced parts of you that had been forgotten, if it served as a mirror, subscribe to the channel. Here, every word is shelter. Every silence is healing. Every video is a step on this journey back to yourself. The journey is long, but you don't have to go it alone. And if you stuck around until the end, leave your like now. Not out of obligation, but because it helps this message reach other souls who, like you, are ready to awaken. And now, the next video is on your screen. Click. Continue. Because the journey doesn't end here. It's just beginning.